"Don't touch me, you foolish girl." The word struck harder than any slap could have. It was a verbal assault that reverberated throughout the luxury restaurant, shattering the ambience like a gunshot in a silent hall. The air grew heavy, and for a moment, everything froze. Every eye turned to see the perpetrator of the insult and the target of his disdain. Every phone discreetly angled into recording mode, capturing the moment when decorum was breached. Caleb Sanders, billionaire CEO of a leading tech company, was unperturbed. He adjusted the cufflinks on his bespoke shirt, clearly irritated that the Bordeaux he had spilled on his tailored jacket would create a stain. Stella Baker stood there, motionless, clutching a folded napkin in one hand and a bottle of water in the other. She didn't speak. She didn't cry. She certainly didn't apologize. She didn't need to. What Caleb Sanders didn't know, what he couldn't possibly comprehend, was that Stella wasn't just any waitress working at a high-stakes investor dinner. She was the daughter of a wealthy investor, adopted at a young age, who had graduated at the top of her class. A former track athlete, now working at a luxury hotel, not out of necessity, but by choice, to observe, to learn, to expose the truths hidden in plain sight. Caleb hadn't simply insulted a woman of color that evening. He had belittled one of the most influential people in the room without even realizing it. With cameras rolling and the stakes for a $3.5 billion deal hanging by a thread, he'd just drawn public scrutiny onto himself. This wasn't merely a story of ego, it was one about power, prejudice, and the quiet strength of someone who had been overlooked far too often. What happened next would change everything. This was not fiction, it was a cautionary tale shrouded in truth. Stella's life had not been paved with silk and gold. At just 26 years old, she had lived through more challenges than most could imagine. Her mother had passed away when Stella was still in high school, leaving her with a void that could never truly be filled, a pain that never truly subsided. In the wake of grief, she had become both sister and guardian to her younger brother, Evan, who had special needs. His smile could light up a room, but his endless requirements made life a constant battle. To Stella, he was everything. Once, she had been a rising star in athletics, driven by Olympic dreams and potential endorsements. But reality is often indifferent to dreams, and with responsibilities mounting, she walked away from the podium to support her family. She juggled 3 jobs, working 6 days a week, pulling overnight shifts just to keep Evan in a good school and ensure he received the care that was crucial for him. Stella had never complained, she rarely posted vague motivational quotes about her struggles. She believed in enduring the hard times quietly. The world didn't need to hear her cry, it needed to see her grind. Her striking features, almond-shaped eyes and soft skin, often led people to underestimate her. She allowed them to think she was just another girl behind a tray, invisible among the elite, because sometimes being overlooked is the best armor. Her job at the luxury hotel wasn't born out of desperation, it was by design. She had turned down easier and quieter positions to work the bustling banquet hall, where powerful men conducted business behind glittering chandeliers. There, she gained access to insights that money could never buy. She watched, listened, and learned. She noted the subtle dynamics of power, the rare kindness and the cruelty disguised as confidence. When Caleb insulted her in front of a room full of high rollers, Stella didn't flinch. Because queens don't react, they remember. And when the moment is right, they rise. Caleb Sanders didn't believe in apologies. He believed in leverage and dominance, in wielding silence like a weapon. The kind of silence that fills a room when someone makes a mistake, just long enough for them to feel the weight of disapproval. At 38, he had clawed his way to the pinnacle of the tech world, building a billion-dollar empire in less than a decade. He prided himself not on innovation, but on control. For Caleb, business was war. He didn't make friends, he made casualties. His public image was polished, sharp suits and sharper words. He spoke of disruption and embracing discomfort in interviews, but what he never shared was his true belief: people were tools. Tools only had value if they were useful. As he walked into the ballroom that night, Caleb saw attendees not as individuals, but as chess pieces, notably, Elliot Hawthorne, the investor he needed to woo. Everyone else, in his eyes, was mere background noise, including the service staff. Caleb rarely acknowledged waitstaff, he never looked them in the eye. He believed his empire had been built on fear, not respect. But tonight would prove different. The girl he dismissed as inconsequential was destined to be the headline, while he would become the cautionary tale nobody would forget. The ballroom was a vision, a scene from a dream, white linens draping over mahogany tables, flickering candles casting golden light, and a string quartet providing an undercurrent of elegance. This was not just another dinner. It was the dinner where futures were decided over appetizers and alliances were formed and broken with a mere glance. One wrong word could shift markets or banish someone from the Forbes list by morning. Stella stood just steps away, dressed in crisp service attire, hair tied neatly back, moving gracefully, like essential yet unnoticed background music. She had memorized every name and dietary preference, had spent sleepless nights preparing for this evening. She was ready for anything. Almost. But no amount of preparation could have equipped her for what was about to unfold. Caleb, brimming with misplaced confidence, sat at the head of the table, and as Stella approached, her heart raced. She leaned in with the bottle of Chateau Margaux, ready to serve, when suddenly, disaster struck. The wine glass tipped slowly, a cascade of deep red Bordeaux spilling across the pristine white tablecloth like an ominous stain spreading through the fabric of the evening. It crawled toward Caleb's bespoke suit jacket, making its way toward the cuff. A collective gasp rose from the assembled guests, and in that moment, it felt as though time froze. Stella's reflexes kicked in, she instinctively reached for a cloth napkin, her voice soft and sincere as she stammered, "I'm so sorry, sir." It was an automatic response born from years of experience, yet Caleb didn't acknowledge her. Instead, he reacted as if she were an unworthy presence interrupting his important business. "Don't touch me, you foolish girl," he snapped, his voice edged with disdain. The words sliced through the air, generating an uncomfortable tension that hung heavily, making it difficult for anyone to breathe. Conversation stuttered to a halt, forks paused mid-air, and the string quartet faltered before recovering. Stella stood there, her heart pounding, her mind racing. She had faced countless challenges, but this was something else, an affront not just to her, but to her very identity. She had heard worse remarks in the past, yet somehow, this felt different. This time, they weren't whispered behind closed doors. This time, the entire room was a witness, and every set of eyes was fixed upon her. Caleb didn't apologize. Instead, he reached out for a clean napkin, dismissing her as if swatting a pesky fly. One of his junior executives stifled a nervous laugh, an awkward attempt to defuse the situation that only added more fuel to the fire burning beneath the surface. But Stella remained composed. She took a small step back, keeping her voice steady. "Please enjoy your meal," she said, her tone calm but laced with an unbreakable resolve. As Stella retreated, the atmosphere around the table struggled to regain its rhythm. Small talk resumed, yet it was a strained narrative, a skeletal laugh anchored by discomfort. Phones began buzzing, many recording what had just transpired, and some sending messages to friends or colleagues who could not comprehend the gravity of the moment. Across the table, Elliot Hawthorne, a respected billionaire investor and seasoned veteran of the industry, set down his fork. He was a man of few words, but his silence spoke volumes. He shifted his gaze towards Caleb, a weighty expression settling upon him, as if he carried the weight of the entire evening's happenings. Stella stepped away from the table, her heart still racing but her mind quickly refocusing. The incident wasn't just about a spilled glass of wine, it was a monumental clash of egos, a public unveiling of character for all to witness. And in that moment, Stella understood. She wasn't just serving a meal. She was part of a larger narrative that extended far beyond the walls of the establishment. While others at the table fidgeted and cleared their throats awkwardly, Caleb continued to push the conversation forward. He laughed too loudly, chatting animatedly as he attempted to brush off the tension. "You know," he said, "what separates winners from losers is the ability to overcome distractions and keep pushing forward." Elliot, however, hadn't looked away from Stella. He saw beyond the calm exterior, recognizing the tension in her posture and the flicker of hurt behind her eyes. Caleb had revealed something important, not just about himself, but about the fragile dynamics of power and respect. Stella had handled the moment with a grace beyond her years, yet the fire simmered just beneath the surface, ready to ignite. As Stella returned to the table, she carried herself with poise, pouring carefully for the guests while intentionally serving Caleb last. A small but significant act. Every delicate movement was a reminder of her dignity. She reviewed the lines of the room, noting how Caleb remained blissfully unaware, dismissing her as simply part of the service instead of recognizing her as a human being deserving of respect. "Let's talk numbers, Mr. Hawthorne," Caleb declared, eager to pivot back to business. "The $3.5 billion deal will lead to full integration within 2 quarters, and will double your ROI in under 18 months. His executives nodded in exaggerated approval, yet a chill swept through the room as Elliot replied, "Before we dive into numbers, I prefer to discuss values." The statement, simple yet profound, caused an electric shift in the atmosphere. It became clear, this was more than just a negotiation. It was a test of character, a challenge that would determine not only the future of the deal but the reputations of those involved. Re-entering the moment, Stella filled glasses with precision, her movements graceful and deliberate. She had served hundreds of these high-profile dinners but realized today felt different. Each pour carried with it a weight of purpose, her dignity rising higher as she walked past Caleb. Away from the table's noise and bustling energy, she focused solely on maintaining her composure. Caleb, still oblivious to the ripple he had caused, smiled falsely and continued pitching as if nothing had happened. "We are on the verge of changing the landscape of our industry," he boasted, his bravado thick in the air. But Elliot didn't flinch, he continued watching Stella with renewed appreciation, knowing that strength could often be found in quiet resolve. In that moment, Stella looked up, meeting Elliot's gaze. It felt almost like a signal. A silent agreement that something needed to change. Caleb had underestimated her strength, believing he could treat her as an unseen servant without consequence. But that miscalculation would soon catch up with him. As Stella stepped back to Caleb's side to refill his glass, he seized her wrist, the grip harsh and condescending. "You wait until I finish speaking," he hissed. "When real business is happening, you don't interrupt." In that heated exchange, Stella took a breath. She met his challenging glare with calm defiance. "Yes, sir," she replied quietly, "I understand completely," gently easing her wrist from his grasp. It was a display of humility, a quiet rebellion that resonated louder than any confrontation could. Around the table, everyone was conscious of the shift. Elliot, still observing, appreciated that Stella chose resilience over rage. She moved to the next guest, pouring with effortless grace, her dignity intact. Caleb, despite being lost in his own bravado, couldn't decipher the strength apparent in Stella's demeanor. But in that instant, Elliot leaned toward his assistant to whisper a few words in encouragement. The time for action was approaching. As Stella continued to serve the table, a tense silence enveloped the room, weaving a palpable fabric of anticipation. Caleb, oblivious to the undercurrents of discontent, prattled on about his company's growth and future plans. But the atmosphere had shifted irreversibly. Elliot, aware of the dynamics at play, kept his focus on Stella, who navigated the room with an elegance that belied her inner turmoil. Caleb's insistent chatter faded into the background as Stella recalled her journey, how she had always believed that her worth was not defined by others' perceptions. She had faced adversity in silence, understanding that dignity and respect were earned, not given. And in that moment, she became more than a mere waitress, she symbolized resilience and strength. "Stella, one of our esteemed servers, has proven invaluable to our dinner tonight," Elliot finally interjected, his calm voice slicing through Caleb's monotone enthusiasm. "I believe it's time we acknowledge her presence properly." The tension in the room thickened, the air heavy with a mixture of intrigue and confusion. Caleb raised an eyebrow, his expression shifting from disdain to curiosity. "You're referring to simply a server, Elliot?" he asked, unable to mask his condescension. Elliot's gaze remained steady. "No, Caleb. I'm referring to a young woman who has more character in her little finger than you displayed with your last remark." Stella stiffened, surprised by the compliment, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief coursing through her. She had never anticipated being acknowledged in such a manner, especially in front of a man who had attempted to belittle her hours before. "In fact," Elliot continued, rising from his seat with quiet authority, "let me introduce you correctly." He gestured toward Stella, who stood frozen for a moment. She could feel the eyes of the room, every gaze affixed upon her, waiting for a performance that might alter the perceptions they held. "This is Stella Baker, my daughter." The words hung in the air, their significance resonating throughout the chamber. The guests gasped collectively, surprised at the revelation. Caleb's face twisted into disbelief, confusion etched into his features as he attempted to process the enormity of what he had just heard. Stella felt a surge of emotions, pride, disbelief, empowerment, an amalgamation of everything she had fought for and endured over the years. "I was adopted," she clarified gently, her voice strong. "I chose to work here not out of necessity, but to gain insights into the world of power and privilege. And tonight, I learned exactly what it means when someone believes their title makes them superior." Elliot nodded in affirmation. Stella has experienced life in ways that many CEOs never will. She understands the meaning of true leadership, treating every person with respect, regardless of their role. Caleb, now visibly flustered, stammered, trying to save face. "I didn't." "No, you didn't think," Elliot interjected sharply. "And that's the issue. You've allowed your position to cloud your judgment, to think of people as mere tools rather than individuals." Guests began to stir in their seats, murmuring among themselves, clearly recognizing the turning tide. Phones appeared, capturing this pivotal moment, streaming the transformation of the narrative in real time. Stella stood tall, embracing the strength that had always been simmering beneath her surface. Tonight, she would no longer be reduced to the mere title of waitress. She was a force to be reckoned with, one who would no longer tolerate disrespect. Caleb, realizing his empire was crumbling before him, attempted to divert the conversation. But the damage was done. Elliot didn't back down. He'd seen enough arrogant men like Caleb sidestep accountability. "Respect is not given freely. It must be earned," Elliot said. "And you've just lost everything because you failed this fundamental test of character." As the evening wore on, it was not only Caleb's business deal that was unraveling but also his reputation. Stella's words resonated throughout the ballroom, reawakening the senses of those who had long been indifferent to the treatment of individuals within the service industry. Slowly but surely, guests rose from their seats, quietly leaving the table. The sound of chairs scraping echoed in the still air. No one wanted to be associated with a man who thought himself above human decency. With each departure, the walls of Caleb's carefully constructed empire began to crack. Finally, with a heavy heart, Caleb stood alone as the room emptied. "You won't get away with this," he muttered, desperation creeping into his voice. But Stella only smiled gently. "Respect isn't optional, Caleb. It defines you. When people see how you treat others, they remember." As the last of the guests trickled out, Elliot turned to Stella. "Are you ready to take on more responsibility?" he asked, an understated pride shimmering in his gaze. With newfound confidence, Stella replied, "I am, Dad. I've spent so long trying to prove my worth. Now it's time I step into my own light." With that, the seed of a new beginning was planted. Stella would not just remain at the restaurant. She would rise as a leader, embracing her identity and redefining the narrative spoken about those in service roles. The next day, the news headlines blared, "Billionaire CEO loses $3.5 billion deal after disrespecting Waitress, a tale of power and accountability." The world watched as Caleb Sanders' empire crumbled not due to a lack of strategy but through an utter disregard for human dignity. Stella Baker not only reclaimed her voice but stood as a beacon of perseverance for countless others who felt minimized or overlooked. She was no longer just a waitress, she was a director of corporate humanity, tasked with shaping a business culture that valued dignity over profit and respect over mere titles. And in that evolution, true power was discovered, not in dominance, but in the ability to uplift others, ensuring that every voice would be heard and every individual valued.